Hello and welcome back to my channel. So I'm gonna deliver on a video that I promised over 2 years ago at this point. So today we are sort of tracing the history of Coachella. We'll be talking everything from why exactly it came about, some other festivals that it was intended to compete with, and then of course some of the popular performances and some of the reasons that more things keep getting added, the prices keep going up, and then we collect more and more sponsors as we go. So let's go ahead and get on into it. The Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, which started in 1999, began as a smaller, more intimate event, a lost weekend, if you will, where fans could spend a weekend in the desert with their favorite bands. Initially, it was a more rock-focused event that took place in October, which makes sense considering the festival's in a desert. Apparently, it was still over 100 degrees on both days, though. And precisely, the festival takes place in the Coachella Valley in Indio, California, which is in the Colorado desert. A little confusing, I know. But again, perfect for that lost weekend sort of vibe. The festival's founders, Paul Tollett and Rick Van Stanton, they were inspired to model the festival setup after UK festivals like Glastonbury, giving guests different areas to enjoy musical acts all at the same time. There was also more of a focus on booking groups based on their actual artistry instead of how popular they were on the radio. With the promoter Golden Voice, they were able to secure the grounds as well as headliners like Rage Against the Machine, Beck, and Tool. And there were a lot of people just eager to see how well a concept like Coachella could do, because at this time there still hadn't been a festival that received as much claim, attention, even mythology around it as Woodstock, which took place in 1969. That festival has come to be remembered as a cultural phenomenon, one that was representative of the counterculture and free love movements that became popular in the 60s, especially in the latter parts of the decade. There were a few attempts to revive Woodstock, for example, one in 1980, but it didn't happen again until 1994, 25 years after the original. And again, rock, debauchery, drugs, and mud abound. And I read a review from someone who attended that 1994 Woodstock, and they noted getting to see big acts like Green Day, Metallica, Nine Inch Nails, but they were surprised that other big bands like Soundgarden and the Beastie Boys or Smashing Pumpkins weren't there. And the author, whose name is James Green Jr., he noted that the festival definitely could have been worse, but with the mud, the bad MTV coverage, it kind of felt like Woodstock 94 was more of an event just held in an attempt to coast off the nostalgia for Woodstock, rather than becoming an event that was memorable and iconic on its own, even if it was held to pay tribute to the original. And in James's summation, Woodstock 94, it was a corporate jack-off music festival disguised as some kind of important cultural event for the young generation. And coincidentally, he's not talking about Coachella, but I feel like some people would describe Coachella that way today. And 5 years later, 1999, Woodstock 99 was held, and this was for the festival's 30-year anniversary, and this one was undoubtedly a train wreck. There's even a docuseries called Trainwreck Woodstock 99. There were several issues, from people rioting and gate crashing to several sexual assaults, and since the festival is taking place in New York over the summer, lots of sunburns and other medical events. To try and alleviate the sunburn specifically and then protect their skin from further damage, a lot of festival goers started rubbing mud on themselves, only to get dirty at best but sick at worst, because there was obviously a lot of feces in the mud.
The porta potties, it didn't take long for them to become pretty much unusable. They were backing up pretty quickly, and then the sewage was seeping out to the point where you had kids within the first 24 hours rolling around in what they thought was mud, but was really human waste.
Several concert goers passed out, probably in part due to them being price gouged over $4 water bottles despite being told there were free water stations. And I'm not sure if it was a situation where there initially were free water stations and they quickly got depleted or contaminated, because that happens. Over 200,000 people attended, and I'm not sure what the numbers were each day, but it was a 3-day festival. So that means if the same amount of people showed up every single day, that would be a minimum of 60,000 people there each day, but there was probably less on one day, so meaning even more on others. And Gil Kaufman, who covered the festival in 1999, wrote in a Billboard retrospective, "I stayed on site all night reporting on the aftermath of Woodstock 99, watching as black helmeted stormtrooper-like police in riot gear marched into the chaotic scrum while looters smashed ATMs and vendor carts, set fire to 18-wheelers filled with soft pretzels, and crashed through the comically flimsy, daisy-covered peace wall meant to keep the non-ticketed hordes off site. Those depressing scenes came after days of watching young men harassing the many topless women who'd had their chests adorned with glittery paint at airbrush stations, while female artists such as Alanis Morissette and Sheryl Crow were greeted by cheers mixed with endless frat boy bellows of 'show us your tits.' A dozen state troopers and police supervisors were later demoted or suspended for posing in photos with topless women or agreeing to have their cruisers washed by nude attendees. Kaufman noted he'd been to several festivals, both professionally and personally, and you don't really expect 5-star treatment at festivals, but things were still terrible even by festival standards. Kaufman also mentioned MTV left the festival early because concert goers were climbing up and shaking their broadcast tower, kind of making it impossible to cover the festival anyway. So mostly, Woodstock 99 was remembered for how much of a disaster it was, the rioting, and the many assaults. All of this was definitely in the minds of Coachella organizers and probably made them double check a lot of their safety and security plans as their event would debut just a few months after this Woodstock 99 debacle. But if they pulled it off, it was a prime opportunity to show that Coachella, rather than Woodstock, may solve Americans' yearning for festivals. And while there's no way the festival hadn't been planned before, of course, Coachella was announced to the public just days after Woodstock 99 ended, and pretty smart to ride that wave. Because of this, in a lot of the coverage of that first Coachella, there are several comparisons to Woodstock 99, and several outlets even called it the Anti-Woodstock. And most of the positive coverage of that first Coachella notes its mellow vibes. One factor adopted from these European festivals that inspired Coachella that really helped was splitting the 70 or so performers into multiple different performing stages rather than the 2 that Woodstock used, and have them further apart. Each tent, the Mojave, Gobi, and Sahara, were all named after deserts, of course a nod to the festival's own location, and all of them still exist today, though others have been added. And additionally, according to Rolling Stone's coverage, they offered guests free parking and gave them a free water bottle upon entry, and also sold other waters for $2 thereafter. There was also food and beer on site, but the beer could only be consumed in certain fenced-off areas. In addition, to control the crowd size, only 35,000 tickets were on sale for each day, though the festival didn't even sell out, with 20,000 tickets being the highest number sold in the festival's second day, which was a Sunday. So about a third, or even less potentially, than the people who were there on a singular day of Woodstock 99. And for each of the 2 days, tickets were $50, so of course $100 for both, which people did think was kind of expensive at the time. And that $100 in 1999, that would be about $190 today, and Coachella definitely doesn't cost that in 2025. In covering the festival's opening weekend, the LA Times noted, yes, the weekend event, which was highlighted by superbly revealing performances by Rage Against the Machine and Beck, was a civilized experience, a mixture of commerce and culture in which artists, promoters, and fans all treated one another with respect. Several outlets noted that it likely helped that while the event was mostly rock, there were some electronic and more pop-leaning as well as dance sets too, which were easier to just vibe out to, and less likely to work people who were already drunk, high, or both into a frenzy. It seems the biggest issue was the heat, because like I said, it was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit on both days, and a DJ who performed at the event named Kid Koala, he said that his vinyl records were starting to melt while he was performing just from the heat alone. The blazing temperatures, of course, made people want to wander from tent to tent and move around in general less than usual, but overall, the first Coachella was a success. The weather, however, prompted Golden Voice to move all the subsequent Coachella weekends to April. And the festival wasn't held in 2000, but did return in 2001, because while it was still a fun event, and a safer one compared to Woodstock, Golden Voice did lose a couple million hosting Coachella. The loss wasn't seen as a net negative, though, because it was only the first year, and also because pulling in these massive headliners set the standard of having a well-curated show, which would not only attract more fans, but would encourage other higher-caliber acts to want to perform. And overall, there was far less mud because desert, so Coachella organizers hoped it would be seen as a cleaner festival, and that would encourage even more ticket sales for the next event. For I think the only time in Coachella history, the 2001 festival would be held for only one day, likely partly a cost-saving measure, and this time the tickets were $65. The 14-hour festival included even more genres, adding more hip-hop and international acts, and expanding its offering of electronic artists and DJs since they were a big hit at the first festival. The biggest issue this time around was securing a headliner and some other acts, which is probably another reason that the festival only lasted for one day. And in the end, Jane's Addiction headlined, actually reuniting to do so. In fact, there was almost more good music than one person could effectively take in, considering that attendees were often forced to choose between 2 or more compelling acts playing at the same time. If you watched all of Jane's Addiction, you missed both Tricky and Fatboy Slim, who were each performing in separate giant tents on far sides of the expansive 78-acre venue. It was still very hot this time, though temperatures had dropped slightly into the 90s, and safety-wise, the biggest issue was the amount of garbage that accumulated on the grounds, which became an even bigger hazard after it got dark out. And about 32,000 people came this time, and while the festival still didn't make a profit, this time the loss was only about 6 figures. By 2003, it seemed pretty likely that Coachella was here to stay, as this was the first year that the festival offered on-site camping. And at this point, Coachella, which was on its fourth year, drew in its biggest crowd yet with over 60,000 attendees, just basically doubling from 2 years prior. Additionally, international interest in the festival was growing, meaning it continued drawing in performers from all over the globe, a notable example being Bjork headlining in 2002. And this actually made her the first woman to do so. In December of 2003, unfortunately, Rick Van Stanton, one of the festival's founders, died at the age of 41 from flu-like symptoms. This would lead the other co-founder, Paul Tollett, to sell half of the festival to AEG, to whom they'd already sold Golden Voice, which again is the festival's promoter. In 2004 was a turning point year for Coachella because it was the first year the festival sold out, and camping became so popular an extra lot needed to be added. This was also the first year Coachella attracted attendees from all 50 US states. And according to reviews of the show, Radiohead headlining that year, you did not want to miss that show. And of course, this would make the festival even more popular and continue to pique the interest of performers because they're continuing to see how much attention a headlining slot could earn them. 2004 was actually the first year that the Coachella organizers considered extending the festival from Friday to Sunday instead of just Friday to Saturday as they'd been doing. But Coachella wouldn't officially become a 3-day festival until 2007. And part of the reason they wanted to extend the festival was to attract more performers, add an extra headliner, but also because people were able to camp on site, it made it cheaper for them to stay at the festival for 3 days rather than have to book a hotel for those 3 nights. Still costs money, but on site's a little cheaper. The popularity of camping at Coachella led to sort of a camping culture forming, as people would come together and organize listening parties for some of the acts that were performing, and there would be other activities or contests. That way there were things to do later at night when sets weren't happening. And this was in the days where Wi-Fi and smartphones were relatively new, like 2000s, early 2010s, and either way, they're in the middle of the desert. At points, some Wi-Fi lounges were added, but looking at the pictures, it seems like people would still, rather have fun in person with each other. And for example, one year, 2009, I think it was, they had a roller rink on site for the campers to entertain themselves. It was, though, a constant dance to secure interesting headliners who often had very expensive booking fees and hoped that ticket sales would be high enough to offset those costs, of course, amongst other costs, which of course did not always happen. In 2008, the festival failed to sell out for the first time since 2003, so of course ticket sales weren't high enough to offset the high booking fees for that year's headliners, Prince and Roger Waters. This was also the first year that they offered on-site campers additional packages like ready-to-go camping sets with sleeping bags or full-on tents for groups to rent out. And I would think they probably did that to try to make some of that booking fee money back. Another move made to maximize profits was the elimination of single-day passes in 2010. There were reports that a lot of people weren't happy about this, but all 75,000 advance passes did sell out. These were almost triple the numbers from the first Coachella, but the numbers were pretty comparable to other festivals like Lollapalooza and Bonnaroo, which had been going on for a few years too now at this point, both starting after Coachella, but they'd come to be considered Coachella's biggest competitors, at least in terms of American festivals. Also this year, which was 2010, Jay-Z was one of the headliners, making him the first hip-hop act to headline Coachella, clearly yet another attempt to cater to even more tastes. There were some organizational and logistic problems this year, because it seems like they were overwhelmed a bit by the high attendance, but it wasn't like Woodstock 99 levels. This did, however, make organizers a little nervous to announce in 2011 that from 2012 onward, Coachella would last for 2 weekends with the same lineup for both. The first weekend would be live streamed for audiences to access at home. But there was, however, hesitation that if people felt organizers couldn't handle 1 full weekend of Coachella, 2 weekends would be too much. And also, just because Coachella always sells out its first weekend, that doesn't necessarily mean there's enough demand for a second weekend to sell out also. But for Coachella 2012, the tickets for both weekends, they sold out in less than 2 hours. So it was pretty undeniable the festival was becoming a cultural phenomenon, both globally and across genres. The 2012 show is also the same one where the Tupac hologram, as it's known, performed with Dr. Dre, kind of signifying both hip-hop's permanent place at the festival, but also being a reminder that Coachella is a celebration of music, art, and technology. And for years, all throughout the 2010s, both weekends of Coachella would sell out within minutes, and it was clear that Coachella was the country's most popular music festival. And clearly it was popular regardless, but I would think the rise of social media apps like Instagram helped in a similar way that sites like YouTube made seeing performances more accessible. In terms of Instagram, you're not only seeing pictures of performers, but also the concert goers, especially influencers, which is relatively new at this time. You're seeing how fun it looks to be at Coachella, and also you're seeing a lot of festival fashion. I'm not sure which influenced which, but I was wondering if its prevalence, especially online, helped popularize that boho Coachella style that was popular in the mid-2010s. And I don't mean it was just something popular every April around festival season. I just mean like around 2013 to, let's say, 2015, these were just the vibes in fashion. And around this time, I remember stores like H&M having a Coachella line, which they started in 2015. And since this was a genuine collaboration with Coachella, it was actually their first major partnership since teaming up with Heineken in 2002. But other companies, especially fast fashion ones, they started adding festival sections, so to speak. Probably not because of Coachella exclusively, because like I said, there were other festivals happening at this time. But these collections were obviously a little Coachella inspired. You're supposed to have Coachella in the back of your mind when shopping, browsing through these items. And also kind of random, but every now and then I randomly think of that horrible like highlighter yellow sew-in that some girl on the final, I think it was the final season of ANTM, she got that makeover because Tyra was doing like viral makeovers on some of the girls, and the highlighter hair was something that Kylie Jenner had worn to Coachella. And of course, there are a couple looks that have come to be known as iconic Coachella looks. I'm thinking of a lot of Vanessa Hudgens, for example, over the years. But the Kylie, this yellow hair, personally, I don't think it was one of them, even out of Kylie's. But anyway, regardless, all of this is speaking to how Coachella was a pretty big 2010s fashion touch point. And for businesses that wanted to go a little further than festival fashion or just hinting at Coachella, some others would start to use that Chella suffix in an attempt to make that connection even more obvious, and Coachella would sue a lot of these companies. And other companies like Urban Outfitters went even further and tried to use Coachella as an adjective to sell certain items like Coachella boots, things like that. So of course, Coachella, they shut that down. They were not having it. And I'm not sure if Coachella, if these looks specifically were the catalyst for the cultural appropriation conversation becoming a thing. I'll bet some of them were just the straw that broke the internet's back, so even if they didn't start the conversation, several of these looks would be cited as examples. But because Coachella was becoming such a sensation both on site and on the internet, it was viral, it was everywhere. By 2016, Golden Voice signed another agreement with the city of Indio, which would allow Coachella to be held there through 2050, which was an extension on their original agreement. Not only that, but the agreement also entailed an expansion to the site, which would allow 62,000 more concertgoers to attend, increasing the capacity to a whopping 125,000 people. One of the silliest things I found out a few years ago is that faking going to Coachella is a thing. Like, not lying about going, just like, oh, I was there and really you weren't, but actually photoshopping a picture to look as if you went. Some people add props from the festival to the background, which is going the extra mile, because I think most people who fake it, they just go out to some nearby desert location and take pictures. That way it just kind of looks like you're close enough, or people don't know where exactly you are and they just assume you're at Coachella because you're wearing fast fashion in the desert.
Coachella's like the influencer Olympics, right? It's the place to be. But most influencers, or a lot of influencers, don't even go to Coachella. And I think that this is such a wild fact. They'll go out to the desert, get like an Airbnb, stay with someone, get their outfits, get their hair, get their makeup, post up Coachella day 1, Coachella day 2, and they don't go to the festival. They don't have wristbands. They just drive their little butts out to the desert to take Instagram photos, make TikToks, get ready with me's, whatever, and then they drive back.
And also around this time, we're seeing the number of sponsors or brands who are collaborating with Coachella that's ballooning, because it's pretty common for influencers to get invited out as guests of these brands, and then they get to hang out in the sponsored tent. I know a lot of beauty and fast fashion brands do it, and it seems like a lot of like beverages and food and drink do it too. And then apparently it's a thing that some influencers get invited to go, and they go to Coachella for the networking opportunities, but they never really spend that much time at the actual festival because they're not necessarily there for the festival. For them, it's more like a work networking event. And then I'm sure to some, they're like, hey, it's a free party. I've also heard that based on where your tent is, who you're staying with, wherever that's set up, sometimes it can just be a logistical nightmare to actually get further onto the grounds to see some of these performances. And by its 20th year, which was 2019, Coachella had obviously grown immensely, too large in the opinions of several. To many, the festival was no longer one that put music first, but one that catered to the same popular trends that initially weren't a focus. Not necessarily a bad thing, but this is also when YouTube began streaming the performances from both weekends and streaming more of them, kind of emphasizing the fact that this festival is far from a weekend for those in the know, even if it was never this super underground event, to something music fans awaited on par with other events like the Grammys and the VMAs. It's no longer one of those things where you only really care about it or pay attention to it if you plan to be there. And to speak to this, we can see a lot of stars, especially more mainstream or pop ones, or honestly anyone who's got a strong social media fan base, they begin using Coachella as a way to market. They tease new albums, new songs. I mean, Espresso, for example, debuted at Coachella last year, and look. We even have performances like Beyonce's 2018 headlining show become so popular they're turned into specials of their own. And to advertise their shows, the Coachella billboards have become increasingly popular, like the For Your Consideration posters for the Grammys. And I was always like, damn, how can they have that many billboards? Everybody and their mama got a billboard. How is that possible? But I forgot, you're driving out to the desert, so you're probably driving for miles and miles. Probably lots of space. And as I was mentioning, because the festival grounds kept growing and because of this they're offering more passes, it was often a nightmare just getting onto the festival grounds, even causing hours-long traffic jams before even getting to the desert. Additionally, the grounds were getting more difficult to manage, so safety was becoming a larger concern, both for staff and concert goers. Higher numbers of assaults were reported, as well as sanitation issues, even a fire breaking out at the shower station during week 2 in 2019. Also that year, security staff made several complaints of mistreatment, citing things like having limited to no food while working, and even having to sleep outside in a floorless tent on festival grounds. One employee said he and the other workers were losing weight over the festival because they were being starved. Golden Voice, of course, denied this, saying they provided water, catered food, and the tents that were available on site were for night shift employees to sleep on site during the day if they wanted to. But either way, it's interesting to see a dispute over treatment at all, considering the festival is making record profits at this point, and they'd even broken a record in 2017 for being the first festival to profit over $100 million. And you can see the growth of Coachella reflected in these prices for sure. As of 2025, weekend passes are now $649 for the first week and $599 for the second week. And obviously this is just for the pass, not for any travel, food, lodging, none of that. And I'm assuming the first week price difference is just because you get to see things first in that first week, and by week 2, some of the performances, they'll be online, they'll be trending, you'll know what to expect. And these prices are over double what they were back in 2010, which again was the first year Coachella did weekend passes only. From what I found, those passes were only about $270, coming out to a little over $300 after fees. In addition to regular weekend passes, you can pay around $780 for a ticket bundle that will shuttle you to the festival grounds, or you can do a VIP package that gives you access to all the VIP areas for $1,400. And then again, like with the general admission tickets, the week 2 options for those are slightly cheaper. I did notice that week 2 passes are still available. So obviously a lot of tickets were sold, I'm not denying that, but what it looks like is that most of the available options did not sell out. And honestly, because I don't check this, why would I be? I just assume that at this point all of Coachella sells out because that's what it seems like, but I guess not. And I actually forgot until I started reading articles again that Coachella struggled to sell out last year too, with 2024 first week sales being the slowest they'd ever been. And some people were indeed happy to see it, thinking it might be a wake-up call to Golden Voice that the festival wasn't accessible for a lot of music lovers, and it hadn't been for a while. And I was curious to see when the sales drop-off happened. I was thinking definitely not in 2022, even if Coachella only sold out that year because it was obviously the first time the festival was held since 2019 due to the pandemic. And it did sell out in 2022. 2023 actually marks the first time since 2012 that both weekends didn't sell out, with week 2, of course, being the one with the extra passes. Looking at articles and posts, especially these last 2 years, it seems people aren't as interested mainly because of affordability. Looking at people posting on Reddit and on Twitter from 2024, they were saying that it felt to them at least, and these are people who had been to Coachella before, that it felt emptier than it usually seems. And I would think also Coachella doesn't feel as intimate or music focused enough to warrant those prices for other people. Especially when you factor in things like traffic, people camping at barricades, and personally all the other shit logistics of going to a festival.
Chaos at Coachella as the journey to the iconic music festival's campgrounds turned into a parking lot.
Coachella, what the hell are you doing? We have been stuck in line for nearly 10 hours.
Many taking to social media to document hours-long traffic jams and no bathrooms.
There's no porta potties, so if you need to use the restroom, grab some food, whatever it is, do that first.
And because, as I've been saying throughout this video, Coachella is the most popular festival of its kind in the US, the fact that sales have been slower over these past few years is being looked at as a warning sign that concert goers might start following suit and buying less festival tickets in general. A lot of people don't have as much disposable income as they used to. And with people acting insufferable in public, camping out, freaking out, trying to get every single thing on camera to have a got you moment, That's just not how some people want to spend their money anymore, even if they could afford something like this. So I don't know. Obviously, there's definitely people at Coachella. I enjoyed watching some of the performances that I've seen already, so this is not a Coachella is dead video. But looking at the posts that some people are making, looking at the amount of sponsors the show has been pulling in these past few years, and just knowing for a fact that people aren't paying for concert tickets as much as they used to, so of course they're paying less for festivals, which are more expensive than the concerts. I think maybe soon, like I was saying at the beginning of this video, if not already, people are just going to start calling Coachella as corporatized as the Woodstock revivals. One thing that intrigued me that I found out was that for Coachella 2010, they were actually deciding whether it actually made sense to hold the festival because they were nervous that due to the economy, due to the Great Recession, people wouldn't be buying tickets. And apparently in hindsight, they had nothing to fear because not only did Coachella 2010 sell out, it also broke an attendance record. And again, this is prior to you only being able to purchase a weekend pass. And obviously you know where this is going, but what intrigued me, I was like, damn, I feel like in 2025, 2020s in general, that would never be a consideration. They would be like, you know what? We're just gonna push it out, and if they buy it, they buy it. And that being said, maybe this is unpopular, maybe it's not, but I've been seeing like over 60% of people who went to Coachella this year use Klarna, Afterpay, some like pay-as-you-go, layaway, as you might know it, modern layaway. And a lot of people are using that as like a gotcha moment, like, oh my God, look at all these posers, losers, fake rich. And while I'm not gonna sit here and act like a lot of influencers aren't flexing for the gram, the TikTok, the Snapchat, the Insta, the whatevers. And while personally, I don't think Coachella would be an experience that I would spend my own hundreds and hundreds of dollars on, I don't understand how this is much different from someone financing a cruise vacation or a Disney World vacation or some little weekend getaway trip to somewhere that's not Coachella. I don't think it's abnormal for people to finance vacations, for people to use a payment plan to pay for experiences like this, especially if it's something that's going to be once in a lifetime to them if they don't plan to go multiple times. Not necessarily unheard of. And it's like probably the people who weren't putting it on Klarna before, they were just putting it on credit cards. So yeah, individually, maybe that's not a financially wise decision for those influencers specifically, but financing a trip, a vacation, I don't think that's that crazy. Something else I didn't know about, which I thought was kind of intriguing, and I guess it does make sense, is their radius rule, which is kind of like a gag order or an embargo, if you will, saying that if I've accepted that I'm going to perform at Coachella from like mid-December until I think the first weekend of May, so Coachella would have already happened by that point, I'm not allowed to announce that I'm going to be stopping at any other festivals that are happening in North America. And then for a little while, or at least until Coachella happens, I'm also not allowed to perform at any tour stops. I think it's in Arizona, Oregon, California, of course, and then one other surrounding state. And I'm not sure if publicizing counts as like, you know, just dropping the tour schedule. I'm sure it would. But I'm also sure the point of this is that a bunch of artists don't end up undercutting like Coachella funds and proceeds, because if you find out that a handful of the artists that you would have bought a Coachella ticket for, they're going to be in the surrounding states, at least a few of them, and you work out that it'll be maybe cheaper to just go to all those concerts individually. Or if you're going to Coachella to see one person and they're going to be in California, you know, pretty soon, then why would you go to Coachella? And apparently other festivals and events really don't like this. I mean, I wouldn't either, because it makes it harder to publicize your own events. But I guess this kind of just speaks to how, at least in that area for this time of year, which, damn, that's like half the year, Coachella is basically king. So yes, thoughts, comments, all that good stuff down below that we can chat as we always do, especially if you've ever been to Coachella. I would love to know your experience. And if you've been to multiple Coachellas, if you've noticed any changes over the years, if it feels like it's less about the music, more about the appearances, the spectacle, if it feels emptier, if it's gotten more hectic because people don't know how to act anymore, let us know. And if you went to Coachella this year, either weekend, let us know. Is it as bad as the internet's making it out to be? Was the traffic that bad? Because as someone who's always got to pee, having to wait 12 hours to just get on the festival grounds, no snack, I would have been done for already. As always, thank you so very much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that you can stick around for more. Also, if you'd like to become a channel member and get early access to videos, the link is in the description. And again, thank you so very much for watching. I love you all so very much, and we'll see you so very soon. Bye-bye.